Hello, and welcome to another edition of History with a Drag Queen, starring me, Karla Marks. Okay, history fans, we're ready to go for a whole new episode, so if you haven't seen the past 6, go check them out. They're all on the Cabaret Calgary YouTube, and they're waiting for you. This week, what are we talking about? Well, you might have guessed from my background. Any guesses? Wait for it. It's Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople, in the period that we're going to be talking about. The First Crusade. What's a crusade? Why are we crusading? How are we crusading? But also, have you ever stopped and asked, when are we crusading? Well, okay, they crusaded for a long period of time, so we'd be here for a while. We're going to do all of them. We're going to dive into the first one. You know me, I get chatting. We'll see how far we get, but it's going to be fun. All right, so why did the Crusades start? Well, that's a pretty great question to begin with. And really, it has to start with poop. I wish I was making a joke, but it really does. Okay, European cities at like the turn of the last millennia, like we're talking like 1000 AD, they're a pretty gross place. They're full of poop, literally straight up poop. You don't want to live there. There's no real proper sewage. The meat is going rancid and rotting. It's not a really great place. The cloth you got to wear is like really scratchy, coarse wool. Nobody's down for it. Let's solve this. Where do you get amazing spices and silks and all these kind of great things that make things, and perfumes that make you, smell nice and your food tastes great and your silk so nice on your body? You go to India and China. This is the famous named Silk Road. Marco Polo's like, hey, I'm going to make a lot of money by going and getting all these really fabulous things. They are more valuable than just getting gold. You can make more per ounce off spices than you can off just bringing back gold. So it's really great for entrepreneurs and explorers to bring back these kind of things. Great, everything's going great. Now suddenly the Europeans have all these lovely luxury items. Things are going well until around 1071. There's a new empire in the game, and it's the Seljuk Turks. And they've kind of risen to power in around where we kind of talk about kind of Turkey into Iran, Iraq, that kind of area there, what they called Persia at the time. And what really kicks off the Crusades is that the Christian emperor in Byzantium, his seat of power is Constantinople, modern day Istanbul, and he loses a huge battle, the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Ooh, Manzikert, Menzies. Okay, so he loses this battle. It's really bad, and Byzantium is like on the back foot now, and people are like, this isn't so good. The Turks take over the region, and most importantly, they start cutting those trade routes. Europe can no longer get access to those spices and those really lucrative things that they were wanting for a while. It'll come back, but anyways. So they lose this big battle, the Christian Byzantium, and the Pope in the West is like, this isn't good. And he looks around and he's like, there's a lot of people around here, and we keep fighting against each other. Instead of killing each other off, what if we kill off other people? And everyone's kind of like, yeah, all right, what are we going to fight for? And the Pope's like, old buildings from the Bible, and everyone's like, let's do it. So Pope Urban II, in November of 1095, issues one of the most famous speeches, and it's not because anyone remembers any part of it, because they don't, but what they remember is that it starts off this big deal. It launches the Crusades, and what he really says is that it's the duty of every good Christian to go and try to liberate the Holy Land from the Turks. Okay, so do people go, yeah, actually, Crusade 1 is a big deal. In fact, there's like Crusade 0.5 before we even get to really Crusade 1. It's such a big deal that the very first Crusade is called the Peasants' Crusade, because literally just a bunch of peasants were like, Europe sucks. We have no money and lots of overlords. This blows. Let's go attack people in the Middle East. Sounds familiar. And so they go. There's like no coordination. There's like no high level involvement of like the popes aren't involved. The royalty of Europe not involved. There's just a bunch of guys. Literally, it's led by 2 guys. One is a preacher named Peter the Hermit. I think we can all empathize with him right now during COVID lockdown. And a knight who's like the lowest of the low, because literally they called him Walter the Penniless. I don't think you get to choose these names because a lot of them are pretty unflattering, like Vlad the Bald and like Steve's the Flatulent. I don't think you get to pick these names later. Anyways, Peter and Walter, sounds like a great story already, lead a bunch of literally peasants out of central Germany and parts of France. And they kind of like go along the old road from the Rhine to the Danube until they get all the way to Byzantium. And they're like, hey, we're here to save you. And the Byzantines are like, with what? They had 8 horses and no real military equipment. There was just like a bunch of guys who were walking around and be like, we're here to liberate you. It's like, go home. Anyways, so they ended up getting really mad at the Emperor of Byzantium, who is in Constantinople. And they're like, you can't come through here. And they're like, well, what are we going to do? And they're like, well, let's go attack this fort that the Turks built. And they did. And they got completely wiped out. So that's how Crusade Point 5 started. Okay, afterwards, like the next year, the Crusaders were like, okay, let's actually get our poop in a group. And so we start seeing a lot of soldiers arriving in Constantinople. We start to see nobles, so a lot of money. The church is supporting this in a major way. And so eventually, about 40,000 troops enter into the Middle East. And their goal is to, quote unquote, liberate Jerusalem. There was a few clergymen. There's about 400, estimates vary, but around 400 clergymen came along with them. 150,000 of them started out. So only 40,000 made it there. So like 110,000, they didn't like die. They were just like, this sucks. Let's go home. So they did. But there were a couple noble guys, Raymond, Hugh, Godfrey, and Robert, which sounds like a really terrible bachelorette party, but they were actually like big deals from like their houses. And so they traveled along the way, and eventually in January of 1908, they launched their attack. They attacked Nicaea, which is the capital of one of the Turkish like principalities, and they won. They had like a lot of cavalry, and that worked well because the Turks didn't. So they get the Turks are defeated in May. And they push on to Antioch, which I personally quite love because I'm a Monty Python fan and the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch is my jam. This was a big thing, though. The attacking Antioch was not just a minor undertaking. And here the Crusaders start to take some more casualties. They have to expend a lot of resources. They win the day, again, because of cavalry. They have an advantage in heavy horse. And this time the Turks flee the battlefield. The Sultan and his army flee in panic. And it seems like the First Crusade is going to end with a decisive victory. But Antioch starts to expose the problems within the Crusader camp. And that is that they're not really so united in one cause as you might think. We start to see a lot of fighting. They're also kind of worried that we got kind of lucky on these two because we fought them in open field. And if the Turks had actually just stayed inside their walls, we didn't bring any siege equipment and we couldn't really do anything about it. So Crusaders start to split. And what we get is the first Crusader state called Edessa. Not Odessa, Edessa. And one of the Christians start to like break off and they're like, we're going to make our own state, which is the sign of bad things to come. So around Antioch, about 40,000 Crusaders lay siege to the city, and eventually the Crusaders sack the city. They bribe the captain of the city guard, and then they sneak in throughout the night and kind of murder everybody. It's not good. But about 2-3 weeks after they take the city, the Turks show back up. The Sultan comes back with a new army, and he's like, yeah, I didn't just forget about this. We're gonna have to fight about this. And so then all the Crusaders who just won the city are now attacked, and now they're besieged, and they're facing starvation, and the Crusaders say, this isn't the way for us. They ride out with their cavalry and meet the Turks in the field, and they win. And so they take that, and then they move on to Jerusalem in 1099. The Crusaders resume their advance towards Jerusalem, taking city after city, all sorts of major ones in the Middle East like Sidra, Jaffa, Tyre, Acre, Haifa. major port cities that allow supplies to start rolling in for the Crusader cause. But about halfway through that year, 1089, there's news that the Sultan is returning with a massive, massive army, and they are repulsed. The Crusaders try to meet this army, and instead they get knocked back. Eventually, the Crusaders kind of reorganize with this kind of sing songs, sing back and forth, we should say, between one side and the other. And eventually the Crusaders take the city and seize Jerusalem, and they announce victory, and they send a letter back to the Pope and say, good news, we have freed Jerusalem. And they're like, he died 2 weeks ago. Don't worry about it. So literally the whole guy who started the Crusades died 2 weeks before. They're like, we won. So great. The Middle East is owned by Europeans now, right? No, it's not at all. What happens is a lot of things happen directly after the Crusaders get into Jerusalem. One, a lot of them were like, we're done! And they peace out. They go back to Europe. They're like, okay, we did the thing. We fought, we won, we're good, right? We're going home. So 2/3 of the Crusader armies are like, we're done. They go home. Second, their biggest guy, the guy who could kind of pull all these different factions together, Godfrey, he died. He got plagued. It happens. The third one is that a representative of the new Pope shows up and he's like, cool, you guys won this. You think you're going to rule us? No, it's under the Pope's rule. And they're like, so wait, we fought and died and you get Jerusalem? They're like, yeah, that's how that works. So they're not too happy about this. And then the Crusaders rebel against the church. The whole guys who sent them and justified the whole thing, they're like, we're not going to follow this. We don't like your rules. These suck. So they elect their own king of Jerusalem and kind of start doing their own thing. They're still Christian and they're still okay with the Pope, but the idea of just handing it all over to the Pope, they are not down with this. And then a couple of their key generals get captured by the Turks. And then finally, the Crusader movement just splinters into a whole bunch of little groups, and they all stop listening to each other. And instead of being one united force, it's a whole bunch of little ones. The result is 5 new states exist. There's 3 Roman Christian principalities, Antioch, Edessa, and Tripoli. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is created, and another one, the province of Syria. And so all of these Crusader gains just split into a whole bunch of little ones. And this is going to be the most successful of all the Crusades, and it is going to launch a lot. The Crusades is actually a long period of time. Hundreds of years will be followed. None of them are as really as successful as the First and Second Crusades, but this doesn't really stop anything. And what we see through the Crusades is a really broad period of exchange where the Middle East and Europe are brought together through these violent clashes, but it begins a broader socio-economic, intellectual exchange back and forth between the two regions. It creates a lot of tension. It doesn't mean that this relationship's always filled with tension, but the Crusades is certainly a moment in European and Middle Eastern and world history that is of particular note. These kind of massive swings that are just ordained suddenly, and everyone just says, yeah, let's do it. It really demonstrates the power of human thought, and that words and emotions and feelings, and properly motivated, can really change our world, which in this case does so in a pretty violent way, and ultimately not really a productive one, but is kind of a remembrance or a thought that words and thoughts and power can be used to mobilize for great good too. Not necessarily in this case, though. Okay, so that's another episode of History with a Drag Queen. I'm your host, Karla Marks. If you have it within you to financially tip, that's wonderful. The link's down at the bottom. I'd like to thank Martin Jones for his wonderful work and support of this podcast, this little show. So thank you so much for your support, and have a lovely day. Click, link, subscribe, share. Everything you do really means a lot to me, and thank you so much for watching another episode of History with a Drag Queen. Have a wonderful day.